That cookie shit makes me nervous.
Man, we got a very special show for you today. Not always stream, but this is. Here we go, baby. Babies and gentlemen, if you're tuning in, I have a legendary indie developer from Steam Games. They work on Ecosystem. It's an evolution game. And you can
I know you better than
do all
anybody,
sorts of
Sophie. Bring
things.
your
And
friend.
we're really going to dig in and get to know what's under the hood. So without further ado, and thank you for joining us today, Tom. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you come from, what got you to where we're meeting you at today.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for having me. So I was in the sort of bigger games industry for a while. Like I started around 2008, and at the time I worked at Terminal Reality. They've since gone under. But you might have heard of them from the Ghostbusters game, the one with the original actors with Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and the like. And I was a programmer though, so not a designer. I can't take credit for that. And then basically when that company went out of business, I started making my own indie games, which is something I'd always kind of wanted to do. And Ecosystem is my second game. I'd made a game called Enemy before that was kind of in the vein of XCOM, like the earlier 1992 XCOM version. The classic one, except it had kind of a bigger emphasis on like the physics simulation with like collapsing buildings and stuff like that. But what I'm working on now is Ecosystem, which is kind of like it's not really like a genre exactly, but there's kind of like sometimes they call them artificial life games, I guess, or like a evolution simulator. Which like for example, like the most famous one of course is Spore. Although Spore kind of like had aspects of it, but also kind of wasn't always that. It was like a lot of games kind of stuck together in different ways. And so the premise of Ecosystem is that you build an environment, and these sort of fully simulated virtual creatures evolve to like adapt to the different niches that are available like in what you've made. And so kind of like under the hood, the creatures are a bunch of like boxes jointed together, basically. And they have virtual brains, so they're kind of like that are sort of like pipeline computers. Like they take in visual input and they do random processes to them, and then they output a torque that's applied at the joint. So like the creatures when they swim around, for example, they're not playing like a pre-made animation or even like a procedural animation. Like they're actually moving the way that we do. Like every joint that they have is individually firing, telling it to constrict, to contract, or not. So if you just take a bunch of these creatures and they're just totally random, they have like random brains and random bodies, and you just kind of throw them into the water. The idea is, of course, most of them will just flail around.
They'll friggin' die, right?
Yeah, and most of them do. But the trick is that if you let some of them can sometimes like move a little bit just by accident, basically. And so you take those and the ones that move the furthest, you let them have more children, and then of their children, the ones that move the furthest get to have more children there, and then eventually you have something that can kind of swim or at least can move.
One thing I noted is that some of the bigger creatures are very slow, but they can
Yeah.
propagate if they're mass.
Yeah, the bigger creatures. So it's partially based on because the physics of the water can play a pretty big role in the game, and in fact that's part of what I'm looking for the next like really big update. Is to allow you to change kind of bigger properties like that, things like the density of the water or like how much energy a single neuron costs or things
Whoa.
like that. But that can actually make a big
Brain
difference in how the
points.
Yeah. Um, and that can have a big difference in how the creatures evolve because I've found that if you like kick up that density a whole lot, suddenly they change the shape of their whole bodies. And so
Yeah.
the big creatures, because they're so heavy, they have so much to move. A lot of times they really struggle to get anywhere.
I made one, and they just didn't want to move because I guess I made the head huge, and his body was kind
Uh,
of thin but big and like kind of shaped like not a sailfish, but those. It's like a species of tuna I once saw, and I was like, I got very long and not very tall.
yeah,
So I was like trying to mimic a actual fish I'd seen, and I was like, can it swim like the actual fish? That would be impressive. And
yeah,
I got something like a sailfish. Not no, it's the Miko Miko. What's the that's the native name, but what's the sunfish?
oh yeah,
Or yeah, those big long ones. It's got those
yeah,
big fins on each end. I was like,
yeah,
surely this mother trucker can just swim and live, even if it's slow.
yeah. Yeah, the sunfish, the kind of a famously sort of weird looking, strange looking fish, right? Like a disc with some fins on it, a little bit.
Yeah, so if let's you want if you want to just can you see my screen all right?
Um, I kind of I'm watching on Twitch and I can see it
Okay,
that way.
that's fine. It can be a little bit delayed. I don't think that's going to be a huge issue. So I've got my graphics. I got it set here, and you let me know if I need to change some stuff. Because this is your playground. I've got a 3080 pumping out some juice, so it can
Okay,
run your
so
game pretty strong.
yeah, you've got a good setup. Yeah,
Hmm.
that all looks good to me. I think you've got everything pretty much maxed out, and I think you probably have a computer that can handle it.
And an aliasing, I like to have it off. It feels like it runs smoother, but we're all
Yeah.
maxed out. So we can make a new game. You can see one of the things I had previously played around with on the just on my own time before we met,
Mhm.
which is awesome.
Yeah, sure,
I'm so
sure, I'd be happy to.
excited. Yeah, this is so fun. Um, you just kind of guide me here. See where we got the options here, of course.
Yeah, yeah. If you wanted to show me the thing that you made before, I'd be happy to
Okay.
check that out. The
Yeah.
continue should probably would maybe load that up right away. I'm not sure, or you could just pick it from the load menu, whatever you prefer.
It's very populated because I had a little too much fun with your grid placement. A lot of people use square voxels, but you've used hexagonal, which makes it so much fun. I love the grid. It reminds me of those old tabletop games where you placed your resource down on the board itself, and you're like, "Hey, this is mine now."
Yeah, I like that too.
I just started making caves and like, well, how much fungus can I stuff in here and nothing else?
Yeah, I always really like to see what people can do with it. Like I'm impressed a lot of times with the creativity that people show. Sometimes they make better stuff than I can really do.
But I also think is like getting that feedback again, just straight to the developer is awesome because I
Yeah,
we can see something immediately and bug test it,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
and yeah, go ahead. It's still
All
loading.
right. Yeah, the bigger the environment is, the longer it takes to load. It's got to because since every creature is like a little bit different, they
Yeah,
have different bodies and different brains, and it's kind of important to the game. So it's not like I can just load one model and then be okay. That's all of them, because the evolution sort of thrives on each individual being a little
yeah.
bit different than the average. So sometimes the save files get a little bit big as time goes on.
Okay, we're in it. So I thought, what could we show on kids' television? Well, I can show creatures named cabbage, carrot, turnip, carrots. Well, carrot. Well, carrot six is a carrot I liked, and just kind of Jurassic Parked him, and cloned them. And yeah. So I think, yeah, the frames might be a little rough. It's still early access. But we got. I'm just gonna kind of pause it because then you can kind of move a little smoother.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks great. You've got a really nice kelp forest kind of going there, right?
Yeah.
And that's the carrot, right?
Yeah, I think this is a carrot. Let me click him. Let me see if I can just. So if I was a total beginner and I didn't know what I was doing, I was clicking a bunch of icons. Maybe just if I wanted to go into the real like meat of this fish, and I didn't know how, because I seen some videos and I was like, oh, but they're just spawning the randos, like people
Yeah.
have created it. How can we showcase some fish editing? So if I didn't know what I was doing, can you help me just? There's
Sure.
some F1s, F2s, and F3s. I'm confused. Help me out, Tom.
Yeah, sure. So this is kind of the info screen. This is something that got added. This was like sort of the first big update after the initial early access launch. And so, of course, at the top on the top left, we have the populations, and part of this is also to help kind of you can see how things are changing. So both like what plants are successful because they kind of have their own simulation too, and what animals are sort of doing well and which ones are dying off. And it can kind of help you see because there's cases you can have where there might be a collapse, because they do have sort of like normal predator-prey dynamics. So it can sometimes happen that like a predator eats its prey too much, or something like
They're
that.
too successful.
Yeah, too successful. Yeah, exactly. And
there isn't too many pro gamer strats.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And so, in fact, that's kind of what you can set there in that species thing on the right. Like, there's a point at which the creatures kind of get a little bit of protection from predation, so that they're a little less likely to be driven into extinction, and a soft cap on the other hand of the actual numbers that species can rise towards. And if you click on one of those species, you can actually get an evolutionary tree. So it may take a minute to load up, and then if you sort of like mouse scroll backwards a little bit, because I think in this particular, if you go over where it says phylogenetic tree, and then let's see, it might have to zoom out because you probably have a really big one, I'm guessing, if you've been playing for a while.
Yeah, I might have left this stream going on
Yeah,
the
there we go.
fishbowl for about 12 to 9 hours straight just to see
Okay.
what kind of critter I can create.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a family tree of all of the species. So the green ones are still alive. All of the purple ones are dead.
Oh.
So and the ones that sort of were particularly successful get to have a picture taken of them, so you can kind of see the important things. But you can actually trace the entire evolution of a species all the way back to their
Look at this
original
guy.
founder.
He's a stud. Charlie,
Yeah,
Maud, Iridith, Gaynell, woo, Melanie, Kimmy,
yeah, he's
Casanova.
Yeah, quite a successful guy. And then they marked some of the mutations underneath. So I can't quite tell.
Where's that? Help me out, because pretend I just woke up from a nap and you're like, there's some mutations going on, buddy. And you're like,
Yeah,
I gotta come and check this out.
So for that Glennis guy, for example, that had so many kids and so many different mates.
Baby mamas.
Yeah. He really spread around quite a bit. So in this, a lot of times you can see an enormous difference just from like one small change, and so he had some joint limits widened. So what that means basically is like when kind of like on your elbow, you can go all the way out to 180, and then you can kind of pull your arm back to maybe, you can't quite go all the way, but you can go pretty close. So basically just that number shifted a little bit for him. He could move his joints a little bit further in one direction or another. Just like we kind of have different types of joints, even like your shoulder is like a kind of a ball and socket because it can go around in addition to just in and out. And so the only change that he had that made him so great is basically that he got a few extra degrees on his joints, um, but that was enough to make like all the difference with regard to him finding all of those mates and having all of those kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So, if I wanted to find a particular mutation, could I do that? To
It's,
like
it's
isolate a gene, because it sort of has the, yeah.
There's not a good way to do that yet, to isolate like a particular mutation. I am hoping to at some point add a way to kind of, because in theory all the creatures do have kind of like a similar, like when they mate with each other, it does actually really combine their DNA the way that like that works in real life. You know, like they get sort of like the traits of the mother and the father. You know, essentially.
Yeah.
Um, and in theory, there's no reason why you couldn't, like, as a player, sort of splice creatures.
Yeah.
So you take a couple traits from one and a couple traits from the other, and see what you get, because they are all sort of intercompatible that way. So that is something that I'm hoping to do, but it's a little bit further on the schedule,
Yeah. Awesome.
future
Thank
development
you
schedule.
for sharing that. That's so cool. I'm looking forward to that big time.
Yeah, thank you.
He doesn't have much survival ability, and he definitely don't have any children. So what's his problem? He seems to be coasting along just fine. If I was curious like
Yeah.
that, he is kind of old, right?
Yeah, so he is kind of old, and it looks like so probably at this point, so the way they age, so it looks like I can't quite tell. Yeah, he's a predator. So it could just be that he basically just had bad luck, finding something to feed on, you know. So like either everybody just happened to get away from him, or he wasn't in the right places. Um, and then that will kind of put you in a bad place. So the reason his survival is so low is because he didn't get any food basically
Oh,
this season essentially.
oh,
So
genetic disease too. I see that a lot. It's like, well, he was living just fine, and then he hit genetic disease.
yeah, so genetic disease is it almost even really is like a kind of genetic disease. So I don't know if you've played like in other games, like if you played like the original Dark Souls, like the first one, or Demon Souls, or those
Right.
games.
Oh yeah. I'm a big time Dark Souls fan, and gosh.
And so sometimes in those games, like when you're running along and you catch a ragdoll on your feet. I don't know if you've ever had that happen, a corpse, and it starts kind of spinning around and freaking out.
Oh yeah, flipping them out. Yes, I see that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, whoa.
Yeah, so that's kind of like a common problem in game physics engines. They sort of because you need to run them sort of at real time as fast as you can. You know, they cut some corners in places,
Right.
just in order to keep the frame rate up. And sometimes that results in the physics glitching out. You know,
Right.
um, and so
Each one
and
of
so in
these is
fact,
like a ragdoll, is what you're telling me.
yeah, they're
Wow.
almost like ragdolls except they're alive. Like they're like ragdolls except they're moving. You know, basically. Um,
That's so genius. And you're probably the first people that ever thought to do something like that with
yeah,
kinematics and things.
Yeah, there was a guy. In fact, the sort of the inspiration for this game, there was a guy named Carl Sims. I was really impressive. So he was doing this in 1992. He made there's a video you can even watch on YouTube called "Evolved Virtual Creatures,"
Oh
and in
yeah.
his version, they were literally boxes. And at the time, you couldn't, 1992, you couldn't run a game like this on a desktop computer, of course. Um, he was at MIT, and he would run it basically on a supercomputer, like overnight,
Yeah.
to get
See, I
to
was
get these.
trying to do that. My computer's strong, but it's still got some leg days to not miss.
Yeah,
Right? There are some dudes out there that can make a simulated universe. Go
yeah.
on.
The tricky one for this game, and for a lot of sort of indie, especially like the more hardcore Sims, is that they end up being more CPU bound. So you can have an amazing graphics processor, but there's so much needs to be simulated, that you can't skip. Um, that even if you have a great graphics processor, it can only sort of help you halfway because you might be rendering everything really fast. Um,
Yeah.
but when the game's trying to figure out, what is this creature thinking? Like, what
Right.
is these?
It's an obstacle that's very difficult. I remember a stick figure game, and it was very simple, and you just drew lines to see if the thing could learn how to walk. Do you remember ever seeing something like that?
I'm not sure. I don't think I do. I might have missed that one.
Really? So it's a co-evolutionary thought.
Yeah.
These other people have did the same thing, but in 2D.
Yeah.
It's cool, but
Yeah, that's interesting.
it's awesome to see it in 3D, because I was like, when is this going to be a real game? And I was like, maybe he's connected to it. I'm going to ask just to see.
Yeah,
but no.
I don't. Yeah, no connection to that. I'm not that. I hadn't heard of that one. I think.
It's called Evolve or something, and it's like
okay.
I would just like try some SEO classics like 2D Evolve game stick figure, or see if something pops out, because it's very unique. I'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
But this game is incredibly it's like a step grade. It's evolved, man. It went from Pokemon to Digimon all of a sudden, and look at the guns on this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, every once in a while you'll get, and he's got a lot of limbs, right? He's very, it's quite interesting. You got kind of a cool creature there. Is this one that you made yourself? Was he based on one that you made in the editor, or was he a random creature?
So no, I made it in the editor, but he's based on the offspring of, I think some of the original creatures still exist. These guys.
Yeah.
So these are the preys. I want to make a really homogenous looking creature base. So like predators were just if we went in the creature editor, I guess like here, boom, right? So I run the risk of creating genetic disease if I want to make this guy just a little bit predatory, right? But I like the design, so look, that looks like a pretty mean predator, and he's got the smarts of the other carrots, right?
Yeah.
So when I was thinking of that, I was like, I'm gonna Jurassic Park the heck out of this and see what kind of meanness I can, if I can make a stable ecosystem last for more than set it loose. A la Bender from Futurama. It's like, safe cracker touch. I want to let it go. So, but I'll show you. If I want to make him a predator, let's just that. He'll probably die of genetic disease, right?
He might. So yeah. I think I never finished answering your question. I think I sort of got sidetracked.
Sorry.
But so genetic disease is basically when the creatures freak out like they would in Dark Souls, basically when there's a physics glitch. The game detects that and sort of and sort of has to kill that creature, because I don't want to have a bunch of creatures that are constantly glitching out the system, in a sense.
If it's the end of its limb is moving from one end of the map to the other end of the map like crazy, it's not. First of all, it's going to look bad. Second of all, it's going to kill your frames. It don't matter what kind of computer you have.
Yeah. And so that's actually sort of what genetic disease is. It's like a creature that either its body or its brain have adapted in such a way that it tends to cause physics glitches, essentially. And in this way, I can kind of let evolution fix the physics glitches sort of for me, because there's not a good way to to really do the physics like correctly so that never happens. It would be very difficult to have more than a couple creatures at a time. Which it doesn't really work. So it kind of like having genetic disease is kind of like a way of dealing with that. Yeah, so that the sort of problematic creatures sort of weed themselves out of the gene pool just kind of naturally.
Well, sometimes in the natural world, babies just don't survive because they're not healthy enough. Maybe you could do maybe it would be easier for the render engine to render, if it can't function, just render a placeholder kind of creature, or it's just like tiny and sickly looking and none of the limbs are formed. It's just a blob, like a potato creature. And maybe it could have a fish head model where its eyes are like, it just looks like it's about, like creepy. And
yeah, that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah, because I think that would help everybody, because if it's gonna fail and you're not gonna see it anymore because it can't live to find a mate and eat or do basic living creature functions, then I don't care if it looks generic.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It looks like this creature that you've selected, which was I think one of the original characters, is actually doing pretty well.
Yeah.
This predator he's it's pretty old, so it says 3.65, so he's even lived through a whole cycle, and
Yeah.
he's guaranteed to survive because he ate enough food. So
Nice.
sort of like the more that they eat, the more that they manage to eat during their feeding phase, the more likely they are to survive into the next generation, basically. And it also tends to make them more attractive to mates. So when it comes
Oh.
time to mate, um, they do a lot better. And it says
Nice.
children 0 there, but he probably actually or he or she probably already released the eggs that they had. So
Oh.
now he's kind of looking to fertilize other eggs. All the creatures are sort of switch hitters, like they can both
Yeah.
lay eggs and fertilize eggs.
Okay.
Because it sort of helps their populations are naturally very low, you know.
Yeah.
So, because I can't really simulate, the thousands of creatures that you'd expect to have in like a real ecosystem, basically. So if I had to split them into ones that lay eggs and ones that fertilize eggs, it makes it kind of too likely for creatures to go extinct,
Yeah.
basically.
Have you thought about loading screens? Because I noticed there's like a world map, and then there's the abyssal beach. Could you make it like a transitional zone so then things get but it's saved when you come back, or that's
Sure.
just gonna is that gonna hinder or help the process of streamlining?
So one thing, so I was hoping to allow for sort of like more broad scale changes in the environment. Like right now, you can kind of like I'd like the idea of that you can sort of grow outward a little bit to
Yeah, because
kind of like in
migration.
yeah, like how in city skylines you can
Mm-hmm.
you have your center grid, and then after a certain amount of time, you can kind of grow out to neighboring areas.
Yeah.
Basically. I like the idea of that, and I would really like to be able
Yeah.
to have something where like maybe you start with a beach, but then you can
Yeah.
have sort of like you can have it dip off into like a deeper, like a cliff, like a
Mm-hmm.
cliffy sea basin kind of nearby. I like that idea a lot, and also it would let you have kind of like very different adaptations of creatures that could kind of even relate to each other. Um, the one thing that's a little tricky about having like fully different zones, basically, is that so like in a game like like Witcher or something like that, if you leave the city and the city doesn't run, basically the city's really just not being simulated at all if you're in another area, and
Okay.
when you go back, it kind of turns back on. But with an evolution game, you can't really do that because if I turned off the environment that you left when you left it, then when you came back, it would really have to be exactly the same
Yeah.
because because the creatures wouldn't have evolved. I'd either have to be running them in the background so that they're still evolving, in which case you'd still have all the performance hit that
Yeah.
you would have had if you were there, or else it would have to be that you come back to this other place and for some reason nothing has changed while you were gone,
Yeah.
which I think might feel a little weird. If things only
Yeah.
evolved when you were looking at them.
Unless you like put some kind of weird effect and made it all go digitized and download something that's you're probably not going for.
Yeah, I'm always trying to improve the performance, and I have
Yeah.
managed to. But the tendency, of course, is that people want to have big ecosystems with as many
Yeah.
creatures as possible. So
Like
it's
a
like
real one, but it's
yeah,
very hard.
so it's kind of like a moving target because I make the game a little bit faster, and then sort of people make the ecosystem a little bit bigger, and then I have to make it a little bit faster still, and then it gets a little bit bigger after that. Because of course, I totally understand that people would like to have
Hmm.
200, 400, 600 creatures
Yeah.
if they can.
Especially if they're divers or they're like, oh, that I've seen thousands of fish just doing bait balls and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But so that's a really hard challenge for you.
Yeah. Um, and there've been a lot of interesting sort of like technical challenges in making this game because it's kind of not like if you sort of like know the genre of game, if you're working on a specific like type of game, then there's kind of like best practices a lot of
Yeah.
times that you can follow. Um, but if you're making sort of like a weird game that doesn't, you know, because there are sort of like artificial life games kind of, but
Yeah.
there's not so many that there's like, oh yeah, this is obviously how you do it. You know, this is the way to make a game like this. So you
Right.
have to kind
They're
of a lot of times,
pioneers.
yeah.
I
You kind of
remember
have
a
to.
game called Niche on Steam,
Yeah. That one I do know. Niche.
and I really like that too.
Yeah,
And
it's great.
I knew that this genre could be. I think you have something on your hands that's incredible.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm quite excited about the next big update, especially
Okay.
because I think it'll allow you a little more direct like kind of feedback in terms of like you change things and then you can really see the creatures evolve differently, you know. Um, and I think that'll really help with because of course the I mean it's a little bit tricky also because evolution sometimes works slowly, you know. Sometimes you really do have to like wait for things to happen. Um, uh, but but I think being able to shift things like I've noticed that a lot of times like changing the water density, for example,
Oh, I didn't
they
even know you could
react.
do that.
You can't yet, but you can
Ah.
eventually. So I'm gonna take sort of a lot of the things that currently I can do in code and expose those to players so that you can make your own things. Um,
Yeah, so let's say I just, this is a pretty straightforward terrain editor interface. There's the up. You can raise the terrain. This says replace, which you can. So, what if I want that to be reef? So I just put that here. You can't see it because ecosystem has got lots of plants in it.
yeah,
Maybe we should start fresh. What do you think?
yeah, that sounds good. Sure, it might be easier to show what's
Yeah,
happening.
yeah. Let's see. So I want to go if I want to. So I go to exit, but it can take me to the main menu. That's a feature a lot of games don't always do, and I love that UI.
Ah,
So you got a good UI and this awesome
thank you.
icon. Yeah, let's quit that. So we're gonna unload loading. So while we're waiting, is there? I got the question probably everybody's burning to ask. Will people be able to control these animals at some point? In other words,
You know
like
that
be able to live in the ecosystem as a creature that you created.
you know, I hadn't. So I've thought about it. Probably not in the short term, but it might be possible. The tricky thing is, of course, that they have totally distinct ways of like propelling themselves, right? Like they have
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever played that game, QWOP, QW.
Yeah. Yes. 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 Or get over it. I tell people
Yeah.
to make like a bridge and get over it at my day job.
Um, it would probably be very difficult if I had, you know, I could have some kind of system where you have like all these buttons to press and each one contracts the joints in different ways. That could be kind of even a little bit funny that if you
Yeah.
really had to control that yourself. The
Yeah.
other possibility would be that you'd essentially steer the creature, that you kind of point it, but it
Yeah.
handles its own forward motion.
Movement.
So there are a couple of ways that would be possible, and you already have kind of like a mini, you know, when you click on the creature, you see from its perspective,
Right.
you know, and so it might be possible to add in a level where you kind of steer it, or possibly to have some kind of funny QWOP-ish
Yeah.
thing
Like
where you
assist.
individually.
Like, hey man, if I could just get that one fin you have and flinch it a little bit, that would help you
Yeah,
out a ton. And then the brain
yeah,
connection could like be made, and it's like, oh, now I know how to use that.
yeah,
Like when you do a motion rig, sometimes you're in the green screen suit and you got the dots all over you. You
yeah,
could do
yeah.
some mocap stuff. I would love to see some uh, really healthy support for this game to allow you to do some wild things.
Yeah, they had something like that in like the old is it like Black and White had that? I think
Yeah,
maybe even like the
Lionsgate and all
Creatures
those stuff.
games
And
where
I
they
loved all those games. They're kind of niche, but they were always there, and they just some of them could have been so much if they could have got a little exposure out there.
Yeah.
So I want to give you some more opportunity to start me out here on this naked beach, we'll call it.
Okay, great. I think I'm a little bit behind, so I haven't seen the beach yet, but as soon as it appears, I can be happy to start sort of talking you through stuff a little bit.
I'm still like generating the world, so I guess I don't want the water to be very deep. So if I want, how do I make that shallow, and then how do I make it pretty flat?
So you want the depth to be 1. I think that's the most shallow you can make the water depth, basically. And then if you want it to be flat, I mean, the basic beach is pretty flat. As far as the other settings go, I might have to see them to remember exactly what it was. You may want to just experiment with them, and then you can kind of drag the camera around on the mini map,
Oh,
even
I
in
didn't
the
I didn't
triangles.
know that, and I'm glad I got you here.
Yeah,
'Cause
so you can do
I'm
that.
a
So if you want
noob.
to get like a quick overview of what the whole terrain looks like, you can actually do that in that screen.
That's awesome. So good. That's a good feature. Like before you even generate a seed, you're able to see what
Yeah,
it's like.
yeah.
So that didn't change it a whole lot at all. So that's great. I'm gonna go ahead and click OK. We'll just do the tutorial if you're cool with that.
Yeah, sure.
WASDA. Most people can WASDA. Q and E. Pretty standard. I like the standard. The best practices, probably, as you're talking about, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Camera angle. Pretty intuitive. Not too hard for an old boomer man like me.
Yeah, me too.
34, 35 in November.
Yeah. 40. So
Ooh, I'm right there behind
yeah.
you, Bubs.
Yeah.
You can let
Yeah.
me know how it goes.
Yeah, I'll
Right?
keep you posted.
Thanks. All right, so it's barren as I'll get out, man. I'm gonna play the part of the. I'm gonna play the part of the total dummy. So, but I have played this game. It's just between me and Dev, okay? The rest of you think I don't know nothing. So, shoot, man, there's nothing here at all. What gives? Where's my fish? What do I do?
Yeah.
I'm about to quit. I'm just kidding.
Do you think? I think maybe the Twitch stream might still be on me. Do you think you could put it
Oh,
on
thanks.
the just so I can check it out? The
Gotcha. See, I need a buddy system when it comes to streaming because I don't always know
Yeah.
what I'm doing.
Yeah. It always really helps to have a second person to check and make sure. Okay, yeah, that looks
The
good.
actual producer, not the lame one like me. So, the plants was sparkling, and I was like, oh, here's a plant menu. So, all these like sand, which that's pretty much I chose it. So, what should I start with?
Any of these should be okay. I often like the Hydrilla should get you points pretty fast. The pondweed, and then maybe the sword plant, something like that. But really, any of them should be okay. I try to make sure that you can't get a immediate failure on the first.
Here's
set.
you go, a starfish.
Yeah, yeah, something that can't survive.
And it just blows up and dies. I tried that and just to see what would happen, and I was like, "Here's 3 different starfish. Will that work?" It did not work.
Yeah.
Food sources. In order.
Yeah. So you want to open up that menu with F2, I think.
Oh, cool. Now I can put plants down. So I'm gonna spam, click Oh, I accidentally spam clicked a bunch of Java plants. Have I messed up?
I think you should be okay.
Oh, okay.
So as they spread, they should get you some points back. Um,
Okay, so it's an investment in the greenery here.
yeah, and so there is like a little the vegetation
Farming.
sort of has its own simulation. The plants don't evolve the way the creatures do, but they do compete with each other. So every
Yeah.
plant is individually simulated, and just kind of like how they like different things. They have preferences for sunlight and different kinds of
Yeah. Like
soil.
these guys are like, get away from me. I want to go all way out here, and you ain't
Yeah.
gonna stop me. I like them because they're going. You see them? Boom.
Yeah. And some of these plants, like the Hydrilla, I know are kind of a danger. In real life, they're often a problem. They can be very invasive. Um, like I think around like off the coast of Florida, it's sort of an issue sometimes. Like
Right. Yeah.
some Hydrilla gets loose and then
It's out of
sometimes people
control.
yeah, some people like they buy them for an aquarium or something like that, and in the process somehow some get into the actual water supply, and then they kill off all of the native plants. Um,
It's like kudzu here in the south.
yeah,
It just grows over everything. It don't matter if it's a plant or not. It'll grow on structure.
yeah,
It acts like the same thing, but terrestrial.
yeah,
Or
and I think there's
aquatic.
a, yeah, there's a couple cases I think where there a few different cities even. I think it happened in Australia and maybe also in South Africa once where they had some invasive species, and then they released a predator to prey on the invasive species to hopefully get rid of them, and then had to release another predator like a level
Yeah.
above that one in the food chain because it became a problem itself.
Yeah, my granny says she has to take a pill to relieve the symptoms from another pill. God
Yeah.
bless grandma.
Yeah, I suppose the ideal case is that you don't have the invasive ones in the first place.
If something will eat it, I'm okay. I'm just a simple farmer, man.
Yeah,
A sea farmer. Okay, it says try placing some species. Life points. So I have enough.
yeah. So for that one, we'll want the F3 menu, right?
Okay.
And then you got a lot of points.
Yeah.
So because your plants have done great actually. They spread really quickly and
Yeah.
got you a lot of points back. And it is kind of like an investment, right? Like you spend it and then you get it back, just kind of like to some extent like you would in a game like City Skylines or
Yeah, these
the
plants are
original
like
SimCity.
bitcoins. They're definitely bitcoins.
Yeah.
Oh, this was trading high over here. Look at him go. So I want some fish, man. Where my fishes at? I got something to feed them with.
Yeah. So they should be ready. If you hit F3 and then spawn somebody in, I may be a little bit behind you, just in case I am telling you to do something that you've already done. I apologize.
You good? Forge button. It says click once and spawn in a batch of 30 creatures. You can raise or lower the placement position on the mouse wheel. What does it mean to raise and lower the position?
So basically, it doesn't matter a whole lot, but basically when that spawn point, if you want to put them right at the ground, you can just click on the ground. But if you want to spawn them higher up in the air, then mouse wheel
Okay.
up a little bit, and that kind of will move it vertically up instead of
They'll probably go and stay where they want to go anyway later, right?
yeah. And it's sort of good for the game to prevent them. The game sort of likes to keep them a little bit towards the surface, anyways. There's a couple of kind of interesting, sort of funny, like quirks that I found when I was like programming stuff myself. And one thing that I noticed was if I sometimes creatures that were spawned in the open ocean and only know how to swim there will have a really hard time getting around.
Oh.
On the ground, like they get stuck in it, especially
Yeah.
if the ground is real rocky. Because I know that you'll see that sometimes, even if you start them on the ground, you'll see creatures that are like stuck on the ground, you know?
Yeah,
It's,
they're like swimming against the ground. I'm like, what is the matter with you, buddy? If you was my
exactly, yeah.
goldfish, I would be looking towards the toilet because I think he's gone.
And the tricky thing about that is to kind of like, so I sort of, because it looks kind of fake somehow, or like I don't really want to have that exactly, but it's
Right?
important for the game that those creatures be allowed to exist and then die off,
Right.
kind of, so that the ones who can actually deal with it survive. Um,
Yeah.
because if I sort
It
of
makes
like if I
sense.
I can kind of help them a little bit, but then they never learn. Like
Right.
and then at some point they eventually run into a problem where they do get stuck, or they never just learn to swim somehow.
Right. Yeah.
It's it's kind of funny because the creatures are almost like perfect cheaters in a way.
Yeah.
Like,
They're trying to outfox you at times, I feel like it. You're like, that's not my intended motion for you. But you've
yeah,
decided
exactly.
to swim with this fin would be really great for you if you like swung it some other way. Like, but look at those big arm fins that you could have used.
Yeah.
I'm like shaking
Um,
my head like he died. Like this guy, he could probably be fine. He
yeah.
kind of looks like that carrot I made, but
Yeah,
a
exactly.
little
It was
different.
very successful.
Now
Yeah.
he's dead.
They
Try
don't
not.
live very long when you first spawn them, so they evolve very quickly, almost like fruit flies. That's
Yeah,
sort of just to get them to the point where they
can
like when
survive.
they're very young. Yeah, they're just kind of learning to swim basically. So so once they reach the point where they mature, then they have to start actually getting to the food. But at first, they're sort of just surviving off of like plankton in the water, or like little microscopic stuff. Is
Okay.
sort of the idea behind it. Because if you start, of course, requiring them to get to some plants somewhere, most of the whole species just dies because they don't, they're just flailing around, and they die off instead of reaching a goal. So you help them a little bit along the way somehow.
Just a little bit of nudge to get it
Yeah.
going. So they're all out here where there is no food. The
Yeah,
only
and
living creatures.
yeah, that should be okay as long as they're immature. Like it's okay if they're because they're just kind of learning to swim, so
Okay.
they'll swim very far out, and once they reach the point where they need to get those plants, they'll start exploring. And they do have like a little model in their head of like what things are where, so they do have to like explore and find things. Um, so they don't necessarily instantly know where the plants are necessarily, so they do actually have to kind of explore and look around. That's why it sometimes even says exploring if you click on them. Um, like,
I caught one.
uh, yeah,
Whoa.
so they don't have perfect knowledge.
Interacting with the creature, the F4 menu, so you can actually move it around. Oh,
Yeah,
here he is.
and if you see one that you like the body of, you can kind of give it a little boost, and a lot of times that will help that particular body. Like sometimes that'll help it to if there's a creature that has a really interesting style, you sort
Yeah.
of give it an evolutionary boost where it gets to
Yep.
have like 15 kids right away, and then
Oh,
hopefully
okay. Oh,
that'll help.
because some more kids happen that look like it, right? It just. Pshoo.
Yeah,
So he kind of looks.
and then hopefully the result of that will be that some of their kids might be better swimmers than they are, and they can sort of evolve that way.
What if I'm a kid and I haven't had my Adderall or something, and I'm just going, and I have a attention deficit, and I'm just spam clicking like that? Is that really bad? Because will that crash my game?
Hopefully, it shouldn't crash it. I think it should deal with everything. Of course, eventually people, once you have a test, once there's 1,000 or 2,000 people playing it, you eventually start getting. So hopefully, it should be able to at least handle whatever you can do. If you really spawn, 100 creatures or something like that, it can definitely, you might definitely see some slowdown. But hopefully it'll deal with it. When I was first working on the game, it was really interesting. I ran into this bug where creatures would die off,
Right?
sort of mysteriously, depending on what I was doing. And what I had found was that they were actually adapting in a weird way to the frame rate. Like
Whoa. There's
the
some
frame
version
rate.
stuff. You're dealing with Cybernet now, buddy. What are you
Yeah,
gonna
like
do?
because the frame rate that they were running at would determine, like, their brains can only process at the speed of the frame rate essentially. And so they would adapt under this idea that, like, I'm running at 60 frames a second, so that's how many pulses I can send out to my muscles.
Oh my gosh.
and then and then what would happen would be, like, if you spawned a ton in where they were like, suddenly it's only running at 20 frames per second, or if you upgraded your computer and now suddenly you're running at like 200 frames a second, they would, like, actually all die off because their brains couldn't process the increased frame rate. Which I thought was really funny. It's something you'd never expect as being like part of the environment, but for them it kind of is. Like,
Right?
the laws of physics are like part of the environment for them. That's what the laws of physics are, right? Are like what the computer is sort of doing.
They're handicapped. It's like they had cerebral palsy or something. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
because you think our neurons fire in an instant. How long does it take for us to feel a hot stove, right? But for them, or somebody with like a brain problem, they're like they have tremor or whatever. I'm being medically serious. I'm not. This isn't. But of course, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. So that's what these virtual fish were going through. They're kind of like seasoning up. Am
Yeah.
I right to think that way?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And so, and yes, so they can kind of have the same sort of problems that even like we have, and in a sense, that's what's interesting about them being sort of artificial life. In a way, they really kind of are a little bit like an artificial life. There's I was really impressed. There's a player on the Steam forums that I've talked to a couple times named Stobbs, and he figured out a way to glitch the camera up above the waterline.
Oh.
Um, and if you build up there, you can spawn creatures. I didn't even intend this to work. You can spawn creatures on the ground, so
Yeah.
gravity turns on for them. And he eventually got creatures that could walk.
Wow.
And I was totally amazed because I didn't even plan on that. Like, I had no idea that you could.
Yeah,
that-
the
that
emergent gameplay stuff. It's wild.
Yeah.
People figure out some wild stuff. They
And
got
it made me
too
really
much
happy
time, and they're really good at what they do.
Yeah. And so that was like, for me, that was like the greatest thing to see somebody actually make that work to do something beyond what I'd even like thought would be possible.
That's cool. I mean, I think similar stuff happened with Subnautica. They had never even intended for above surface gameplay, but then it just sort of, just like evolution, tried to crawl and scrape its way onto the land, and where there wasn't land, people made some.
Yeah, yeah. It's great. It's really cool what people can do sometimes, like how creative and how clever they are.
Well, Tom, do you want to play God for just a second? Let's pick a creature and you can cull it. I think that's part of the tutorial.
Sure, sounds good. I kind of like all of these ones that I'm seeing right now. They all look kind of interesting.
So if you were going to go through your population, you can actually just click the name of the species on the map.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and it should warp you to each individual as you go.
I really like that because I was like, I wonder, because I was doing some creature editing and I was like, I had another question earlier. We were talking about so I did the editor. What about him? He's a little bit weird, isn't he?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think that'd be a good choice. We can get rid of him.
He's probably not gonna make it anyway. Maybe we'll just. I feel sorry for it almost.
Yeah, I actually feel bad. I usually myself don't ever call anything. Like I just boost things, and sometimes if something seems stuck, I'll lift it up and help it on its way every once in a while. But I do actually notice to some extent I feel a little bad to just blow up the creatures.
Yeah, unless it's just like a big problem. You know, like a gator at a playground.
Yeah, exactly.
So I dragged it. The tutorial is congratulating me. Yeah. and then I'm sort of turned loose a little here. What? Oh, here we go. Terrain modification. I can't wait for you to, pick our brains up off the ground with this. I'm a total beginner. We'll pretend it. Okay, I'm in the tutorial. I got the terrain menu. What's up mean? I'll click. Oh, cool. I made a rock.
Yeah, and you can pick different terrain types if you'd like to change stuff, and that should affect the world in a couple different ways because some plants like different kinds of terrains more than the other. And another thing that a lot of people don't notice because I think it's very subtle, but for creature visibility, like in terms of like predators seeing prey, or even like creatures seeing each other when they want to mate. It does actually take things like camouflage into effect.
Yeah, I saw that, and I made a little shoal. I was trying to design a little shoal with plants and landscape it, and see, if something would stay in the little shoal there and survive.
Yeah.
Maybe we could try. You could try to help me make and see if we could do a little. Yeah.
Sure.
Terrain. Several way soil types. Can you talk about some of the soil types and more in the camouflage? Maybe the differences between each.
Yeah, sure.
So I got a little spatter here, so.
So basically, whenever a creature looks at another creature, it does sort of like a vision check, almost like what you do in like a Dungeons and Dragons, like
right.
So it compares its own vision against the color of the creature, and then depending on what's nearby, so if it's looking downward, it'll compare against the ground. So like if you have a red area, then red creatures will blend in and they'll be more likely to not be seen by predators, or vice versa. Predators that fit their terrain have an easier time sort of sneaking up on prey, and it works the same way. Like if you're looking down, of course you want to look like the ground or the plants. If you're looking up, you want to look like the water that's up above, which is why you see so many fish that have a bright belly and a dark
orca
back.
Perfect
yeah, exactly.
Example. Mm-hmm.
And then as far as in addition to that. The different terrains, of course, plants prefer different kinds of terrain. Most of them can actually survive on all kinds of terrain, which is not necessarily true in real life. But it felt a little too harsh, especially given that like you might have a rocky base ground, that it felt a little bad if you can't make them survive at all. So
right.
What tends to happen in the game instead is that some creatures are just a little bit better at adapting, so they'll be more successful. And if there's two plants that are kind of, so the plants almost kind of have little wars, right? They're little replicators that shoot out.
That's what I was thinking. Exactly.
And so usually if one plant sort of is very well adapted to its terrain, it likes the amount of sun that it's getting, and it likes the terrain that it's on, it'll win. It'll tend to win out. There's little conflicts.
Oh, look at his little mouth. That's new. I didn't notice that. The little mouth can swing open. Cool. So this plant might not even want to grow on that terrain.
Yeah, or it might have a harder time. And then you can also shape the currents, and that's kind of a system that I hope to work on a little bit more just to make it a little more better connected to the rest of the game. But that should sort of drag along when they release seeds. The currents will pull the seeds along in that direction. And the same with the creatures laying eggs. It'll pull their larvae along the direction of the current, wherever that happens to be. There's a couple of plants that like current, and so they'll sort of pay off more life points if they're around current, or if they get to move a lot, like the plankton, they like to float on current.
Can I just make a big swirl? Like those big. So maybe I can try to get like one of those shoals where they just go around in circles and circles.
Yeah, you can do that. In fact, that does work.
How long can I do this?
There is kind of a current simulation also. So if you build if you build cliffs or like big towers and stuff, the currents should flow around them in a realistic way, which you can kind of see sometimes when you actually build as you're building stuff if there are currents going on.
If fish get caught in that current, will they just swirl around?
No, so the fish don't get affected by the current, um, but that is something I'm kind of looking into for a future update. The problem I tend to have before when I've tried that out is related to the issue of the creatures being perfect cheaters.
Yeah, they just
Which
swim
is
at the edge, right, and then make.
yeah, because well, they're sort of lazy, which makes sense, and they tend to evolve like a big sail, and then they don't
Oh,
actually even move. They just kind of
right.
float their whole lives away a little bit.
Who wouldn't love to do that, right?
Yeah. Um, so for that reason, I don't let it affect them. But I think once that becomes something that, like, if I can expose that to players, where that's kind of like a choice that you're making, I would feel a little bit better about, like, oh yeah, okay, if I let the currents affect the creatures, then that's kind of what you want, right? Like if to be able to shift
Yeah.
things so that it pushes more or less on them, where they have to deal with it.
Maybe you could introduce a balance issue so that they get hit by, because fish and big bait balls are going to be seen for how far away, right?
Yeah.
From space. So maybe they could be more attractive to predators who are looking for food,
Yeah.
they require less energy to move while in the current. So it's like a area of effect where the current is. So they're
Yeah.
going to be drawn to it. It's not necessarily a physics thing. So
Right.
they're gonna, and they'll follow. Maybe they could do a flow, or it could, I'm just thinking out loud here. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that idea. I think a lot of times, especially because I like that it kind of fixes or it sort of approaches the problem from I like the idea of kind of like the most interesting games. I feel like they kind of approach problems at a small level, so that you provide building blocks, in a way. And I
Yeah,
like that idea that you allow it, but it has kind of like a downside, but it's a downside that makes sense and that can be kind of worked around,
yeah.
And because of the way the creatures are, they'll sort of naturally try to work around
Stay within the
things.
current, so it'll sort of kind of look like they're flowing, and that'll
Yeah.
alleviate some of the physics load. That's what I was thinking.
Mhm.
It'll make it like a plant. They are attracted to that zone because they thrive. Their evolutionary process thrived in just kind of not moving and hanging out in a current, like a buzzard or something.
Yeah. And that's another thing. People have asked about that sometimes, and that is also something that I'm hoping to put in hopefully in the future. I don't want to promise too much stuff, especially because sometimes
Right.
things like I have to sort of test and try things out to
Mm-hmm.
see what will work and what won't work. Like sometimes I have an idea and it just kind of doesn't fit with the way the creatures evolve. It's just hard to get it to work. But it would be nice to have something like scavengers at some point, something that
Yeah.
doesn't eat plants or but just kind of hangs around and waits for something to knock off on its own.
Yeah, that's cool. So I'm gonna switch the scene. Okay, so the next part of the tutorial, it wants me to make a monster, make a fish man. The funnest
Ah, okay.
part.
Yeah, that should be good.
We got all these options on the left, and then the options on the right. So I've never I'm 10 minutes in my game. What do I do?
All right, so this is kind of tricky because it's sort of fundamentally a difficult thing to do to some extent, just to modify the genes of a living creature. Um, I'm still like I'm a second behind, so I'm waiting to see what shows up on the thing. I assume right now you kind of have a creature that's basically just a head
Potato. Yeah.
and a body and nothing else. So probably the first thing we want to do is just to add some kind of limb, right? Um, and I think the tutorial should be telling you how to do that.
Okay. In size mode, move mode, and rotate mode. 1, 2, and 3.
Uh, yeah, and that plus button that's kind of to the right should add a new limb.
Okay. Try resizing or rotating. So 1, 2, or 3. Okay, I'm gonna just see what I got some sliders on the right. Oh, here says creature. Add a new limb to the plus button. Delete the selected part with the. Try adding a part. Now I added it. Add another part. Okay. Mirror limb.
Yeah, so the mirror limb kind of just is to help make things symmetric. Creatures will adapt if you give them non-symmetric body parts, and sometimes they even kind of do that themselves. But the mirror should just, if you have a limb selected, it just puts it on the opposite side of where the creature is, basically. So everything on the left is skin related, and so that's mostly aesthetic, but it does matter for evolution in as much as it affects how well they can see each other and how well predators can see them. There's kind of a conflicting desires there, in the sense that, like, for mating purposes, you want to be as fancy as possible. You want to really stand out as much as you can, usually, because that's the most impressive thing to do. But for survival purposes, if you're either a prey that wants to hide from predators or a predator that wants to not be seen by prey until the last possible moment, you want to, as much as possible, look like the environment that's near you, you know?
Yeah.
So in theory, it should work a little bit, even like the I forget what it's called, the birds of paradise, you know?
Peacocking in that
yeah.
sort.
So if you have a bunch of foragers in the absence of, and this is something I'm also hoping to add more, like, sort of bright colors if I can in a future update, but that if you have this nice environment where there's just a bunch of plant eaters and nothing wants to eat them, then you should actually see a lot of sort of peacocking style behaviors where they
That's
evolve,
cool.
really complicated standout things. And if you then throw in a predator, all of a sudden you should start seeing them look a lot more like the plants that are around, or the sand, as they need to. It helps them to the one that the prey that doesn't get seen is the one that gets to live on into the next generation.
I missed the prompt. So, what? There's a. I was supposed to. So do I just click check mark and done? And there's a red box around my fish. Is that significant? It looks like it's bad.
Yeah. So the red box off usually means that there's like a that you can make creatures that are self-intersecting, and that's usually what the red box is telling you, that somewhere one of its limbs is kind of going into another of its limbs. Sometimes they can deal with that when they're born, they'll push it out, but sometimes they can't, so it adds a little element of that. It makes it a little bit more likely that you might have a creature that has kind of genetic disease or something when it gets born. I'm trying to see what it thinks it's run into.
I might just remove pieces of it.
Yeah, and that will work if you just remove the one that's red. At some point, eventually, you'll get one that's all green. That's the minus button. If you select the part and click the minus, that should make that part go away. And of course, you can also do the I mean, you'll lose the creature that you made, so you don't necessarily want to do this now if you but you can also just randomize it, and then you'll just get random bodies. Basically, what you wouldn't get if you spawn random creatures in. If you want to work from like some kind of base, like instead of adding stuff to a empty creature, if you want to start with somebody,
it allows you to a little bit. Take a design and modify. Already make it streamlined. So that's kind of cool. Is that gonna work? Because I like the way the fins are acting.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. You could try it out and see. I think. So it may have a little bit of trouble with, so the center piece is red. Is that right? Is it still red?
No, I think it's all good. Everything looks lime green or green.
Yeah, should be good to spawn in though. Then if you click that check, you should be ready to release him into the wild.
Name my species. I'm gonna name it Tom. Now I gotta take a picture.
I hope that it was not a disappointing creature after all of that.
I hope the species that doesn't go extinct immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you make a creature yourself, it'll fix that body type, but their brains are not fixed. So the idea of making a creature is, because I don't want them to just immediately evolve away everything that you made and be like, I want 2 fins in the back and that's everything else is gone. so they keep a fixed body, but their brains will evolve. So they're kind of learning. They'll try out a bunch of different ways to swim with the body that you've made, and hopefully the one that works the best, at least in terms of getting them where they're going, should be the one that predominates. And hopefully that'll work out for this species, that they won't die off, but will.
Load the DNA button 4. We're gonna load Tom, and then I can just click not healthy enough. That's my fault. I didn't put. I should be healthy right here. Tom, you can live here. Now we got a lot of eggs in the water. That's what that white stuff is.
Yeah.
They're just waiting to grow up. Looks like we already got some baby Toms.
Looks good.
Yeah. Oh, he's not very old, is he? Okay, completed that part of the tutorial. Nice. Clicking on the creature disc. Oh, I did it. Oh, those guys are doing pretty well while we're fiddling around with new species.
Yeah.
Support multiple trophic levels. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So the trophic levels. There's 3 trophic levels in the game now. You have your foragers, the predators, and then the apex predators. The idea being, of course, that the predators eat the foragers and the apex predators eat the predators. And so what you'll see usually, and how you kind of want to set it up, is the same way it is in nature, where you have a lot of foragers, and then it's forms a bit of a triangle or a pyramid, and then a smaller amount of predators, and then a very small number of apex predators. And what you will tend to see, the game doesn't it doesn't fake this, but it does sort of work out the way it does in nature, which is that you tend to see kind of like this alternating cyclic trend in the population sometimes, where you'll have a growth of foragers that results in a growth of predators because there's suddenly more food for them.
Yeah.
And then the growth in predators results in the contraction of the forager population, which is followed by a contraction in the predator population. So they kind of follow each other in like a wave pattern a little bit.
He tried to come out of the water. Watch him. Did you see that? He's like, I don't want to be in the ocean anymore. They're using their own brains. That's so amazing to me. I can't get over it.
Yeah, and when they get over the surface, it does actually sort of turn off the gravity, or it turns on the gravity. It does actually function like there is sort of a shift in the environment for them, and that can even be like a successful motion strategy to be kind of like a flying fish, essentially.
He was doing so cool, and he died.
Yeah.
You gotta boost quick, y'all, if you want the really good ones.
Yeah, you can if you need to, because I have that problem sometimes too, like to just really quickly slam the space bar to pause the game.
Oh, yeah, good tips.
And then zoom in and get them, because I've had that happen a lot of times too, that by the time I've pressed the F4 and then clicked the 2 to give it a boost, yeah, it's too late and it's died already.
Sometimes they just have bad luck, but not this guy. Look at him.
Yeah.
He's boosted while I did that JoJo reference where he's like, Warudo! I don't know. So cool. I feel like Tom's going to make it just fine. And they turn me loose.
I'm glad. I'm happy.
So what? So I know all the tools now. Oops, he died. Oh, he died. Y'all can make it. You're good swimmers. So he's doing alright. Boost him. If I say I like him, but I just kind of wish... Oh, so I can't edit him unless it's real time. Is that right?
That may be the case. I'm not sure, but it will pause once you hit edit.
Okay. So it's not all going on.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll stop stuff.
I want him to be a predator, but he's gonna still be in the same species because I didn't save it or anything. Will he eat the only thing around him, which is his own kind. You know, are we
Yes.
talking cannibalism? Is it in the game? Awesome.
They will. They prefer not to eat their own kind, so as long as there's something other than them, they will always prioritize something else. Um, but
Turn on your
predators,
own, Tom. Turn on your
yeah.
own. I'm rooting
But
for him.
predators, if they become desperate, will start attacking each other. They will eat their own. Although usually, of course, that's the first step to a collapse. Because if they're
Yeah.
you know, once you start having to eat your own species, you're kind of in a tough spot.
Now, how do?
But yeah, they will do that.
Oh, okay. That's really cool. I was wondering because I wasn't really sure.
Yeah, when I first started out, it was kind of tricky to get the trophic levels to work. It was really common for predators to eat all the prey and then die. It was like such a like it would happen over and over and over again. It actually took quite a decent amount of effort to get sort of stable populations. And interestingly, that happens in the lab a lot of times too.
Yeah.
Like so in nature, it's quite rare, I think, for that to happen, though it can. But in lab situations, it happens quite a bit. And I think what they've often found, I could be wrong because I'm actually a math, more like a math computer science person than a biology person.
Right.
But it's my understanding that they often find that sort of like the more complex the lab environment, like if there's more places that the prey can hide, and these are when I say prey, they're like you know insects usually, something like that. If there's more, if sort of like the more complexity that there is in the environment, the more stable the two populations tend to be. And I think a lot of times in nature there are like little sort of reservoirs, like a safe place where a prey can kind of hide and
Yeah.
replenish their numbers if it gets too low.
So if I want, so I'm like, man, all my good fish bros that are getting eat out there, can't I just make a little hidey hole for them to live in and be at peace?
Yes,
Can I do that?
that can help. That can work. Although usually predators are smart enough that they can get into caves and stuff like that. And that is part of why if you open that F5 menu that had all the charts and graphs and stuff,
Right.
there's that safe limit, the minimum safe limit, and so what that's supposed to do is like once their population gets so low that they're like in a lot of trouble, like less than 10 or something, um, the predators start preferring other species,
Okay.
basically. And that's kind of meant to sort of halfway simulate that idea that there's like a little safe place for them somewhere in the environment where they're
Okay.
not getting torn apart by predators all the time. And you can increase that up higher if you'd like, if you want to make sure that some species is safe and doesn't get wiped out, or if you want to be a little more hardcore about it and you can set it to 0, and they'll have no protections at all, and it has to work just like nature.
Also, so like I noticed that I just have the same beginner plants. I never even thought to buy new plant upgrades.
Yeah.
Can you tell them about that?
I mean, I'm happy with people
Yeah.
playing however
Yeah.
they like. Yeah, you can get away with just the base plants. And that's a totally fine way to play. There's even like a different mode. There's a creative mode where you just set the plants and they just
Oh.
kind of serve as a kind of like they don't spread, they don't simulate. They just kind of are in place and they grow back where you set them down. But in this case, I'm totally happy to have like sometimes that happens even in
Yeah.
nature that you have an area with a couple plants. You of course you can unlock more, and then you can start building like the kelp forest like you had in your situation. And if you go on long enough, you get to like coral reefs and stuff like that. But I kind of see that as being its own reward, and I'm happy with people to do whatever they find interesting.
That's awesome. So I want to cover the update just fairly quickly. I know you're a busy guy, and I promise I won't hold you captive too much longer.
All right, sounds good.
So I'm in the
So-
aquarium update. This is a brand new. There's all kinds
Yeah.
of stuff in here.
Yeah, so the idea of the aquarium is that so it's just to sort of have an area where sort of like all the best creatures from all of your playthroughs can kind of live and be in a safe place. So they don't eat each other in the aquarium. They have their own food, and they don't have to worry about any of the sort of pressures that exist. They don't actually evolve in the aquarium either. They just kind of happily, peacefully swim around.
I like it.
And so basically what it does is any creature that you've saved over the course of the game will appear in your aquarium, so that you can kind of have, there's 9 different rooms, and you can sort of decorate them so you can not only shift the environment, but you can also move species from one room to another. If you want to have like your deep sea room in one place and you want to have your beach creatures in another, you can swim around and make that happen. And so it's just kind of meant to be like a nice place for you to like a little sort of trophy room of the best things that you've seen happen. Because I know that'll happen to me. I'll have like a creature that I like. So just something that pops up that I think is really interesting. Just something that evolves that's really cool. And I like the idea of being able to have like to keep it around, just to have a place where it's like, oh yeah, that's where that lives now. So you can always go and see it if you want to.
Well, Tom, which room would you like to live in?
You know, it's hard to say. I like all of them. I think maybe the coral room is our coral reef room. I think.
I guess it depends on who your roommates are. We could check them out and make sure they, we can screen them for you.
Yeah, sounds good.
Well, I don't know about this room. He's kind of cool looking.
Yeah, that's